I think my boyfriend and my friend have a closer relationship than I realized. Am I right to be suspicious? I am 21 years old, and for the last 4 years, I have been entangled in a relationship with my boyfriend, a man 7 years my senior. It all began innocently enough, a mutual attraction that grew from chance encounters and late-night conversations, as so many romances do. But the bloom of young love soon began to wither under the weight of secrets, half-truths, and the gnawing feeling that something vital was missing. From the beginning, his propensity for dishonesty was a quiet whisper in the background of our relationship, something I tried to rationalize or excuse. Everyone tells little lies, I told myself, clinging to the idea that he was like everyone else, imperfect, yes, but capable of honesty where it truly mattered. But as time went on, the lies grew harder to ignore. They were no longer harmless omissions but blatant fabrications, glaring inconsistencies that made my stomach churn. He would tell me one thing, only for me to discover something entirely different later. The betrayal felt like a slow poison, subtle at first but increasingly unbearable. Over the last 2 or 3 years, my attempts to leave him became more frequent, more desperate. I would summon every ounce of courage to end things, convinced that I deserved better, only to find myself ensnared once again. Each time I tried to walk away, he would crumble before me. He would sob and beg, tears streaming down his face as he promised to change, to do better, to be the man I deserved. And each time, I would falter. His sorrow seemed so genuine, so raw, that I couldn't bring myself to leave him in such a state. It was as if his pain shackled me to him, an invisible chain forged from guilt and lingering affection. But as the years passed, those chains began to feel more like a prison than a bond of love. The crux of our issues was his dishonesty, a cancer that ate away at the foundation of our relationship. It wasn't just that he lied, it was the reasons he gave for doing so that infuriated me. He would claim that he lied to protect me, that he only hid things because of how I might react. You get so upset, he would say, as if my anger justified his deceit. But for me, it wasn't about the content of the lies. It was about the principle. I valued truth above all else, even when it was painful. I believed that honesty was the bedrock of trust, and without trust, what was left? Despite his promises, despite his tears, he kept lying. He would look me in the eyes and swear that this time was different, that he was being honest. And yet, the truth always found a way to reveal itself, unraveling his carefully constructed stories like a thread pulled from a fraying sweater. Over the years, his dishonesty became a cycle: lie, discovery, apology, repeat. And each time, a little more of my faith in him crumbled away. The last few days had been particularly tense. The fights between us had escalated, each one leaving me more drained than the last. I was tired of feeling like I was in a constant battle, not just with him but with myself. My heart and mind were at war, one clinging to the hope that things could get better, the other screaming that enough was enough. I had reached a breaking point. The weight of his lies, his excuses, his tears, it was all too much. I was suffocating in a relationship that was supposed to bring me joy but had become a source of endless heartache. He paints a picture of our future like it's a masterpiece waiting to be unveiled. His words are drenched in optimism, as though he can see the life we're meant to have, one filled with laughter, love, and the kind of happiness you only read about in novels. He talks about a shared home, one where we'll wake up to sunlit mornings and each other's smiles. He talks about marriage, as though the promises we exchange on that day will be enough to erase the years of mistrust and disappointment. But the harsh reality is that we're nowhere close to that idyllic life he speaks of. We can't even live together. The logistics, the finances, the emotional strain, it all seems insurmountable. And then there's the glaring fact that, after 4 long years, I have yet to meet his mother. 4 years. The woman who raised him, who is supposedly one of the most important people in his life, remains a stranger to me. It's not as though she lives in some faraway land or refuses to meet me. No, it's because he has never introduced us. I've tried to broach the subject with him more times than I can count. Why haven't I met your mother yet? I'd ask, my voice a mixture of frustration and hurt. He always has an excuse: she's busy, the timing isn't right, he doesn't want to rush things. Rush? After 4 years? It feels like a cruel joke, one that I've been the punchline of for far too long. And yet, he expects me to introduce him to my parents, knowing full well how complicated that would be given our different religious backgrounds. It's not just about religion, it's about respect. Introducing him to my family would be a significant step, one that carries weight and meaning. It feels unfair, almost hypocritical, that he would ask this of me when he hasn't shown me the same courtesy. It's another crack in the fragile foundation of our relationship, one that grows wider with every unanswered question and broken promise. As if this weren't enough to contend with, there's my so-called friend. She's the same age as me, and for as long as I've known her, she's had this peculiar knack for inserting herself into my relationship. At first, I didn't think much of it. She claimed to care for both of us, to love us equally, and to want what's best for our relationship. I can't pick sides, she'd say, as though neutrality were some kind of moral high ground. But over time, her actions started to tell a different story. Late-night phone calls became a regular occurrence. She'd ring him up under the guise of needing advice or comfort, pouring her problems into his ear while I lay awake, wondering why she couldn't call anyone else. Then there were the coffee meetups, casual enough on the surface but always tinged with an intimacy that made my stomach turn. And recently, she crossed a line that I can't ignore. She went to his house and met his mother. It stings more than I can put into words. 4 years, and I haven't been granted that privilege. 4 years of loving him, of supporting him, of putting up with his lies and excuses, and yet it's her who gets to step through that door, to shake his mother's hand, to be welcomed into a space I've been kept out of. She wore it like a badge of honor, too, casually mentioning it to me as though it were no big deal. But it was a big deal, at least to me. I started piecing it all together: the phone calls, the coffee dates, the visit to his house, and the picture it painted was one I didn't want to see. She claimed she was doing this for us, for our relationship, but it felt like a betrayal. Her words said one thing, but her actions spoke volumes. She wasn't neutral, she had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. The jealousy and suspicion gnawed at me, but more than that, it was the injustice of it all. How could she meet his mother before me? How could he allow it? The anger I felt wasn't just directed at her but at him as well. He had let this happen. He had opened the door for her while keeping it firmly shut for me. And no matter how much they both tried to downplay it, to act like it didn't mean anything, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Yesterday started like any other day: quiet, routine, uneventful. That is, until I scrolled through Instagram and saw it, a story that stopped me cold. There she was, my friend, smiling brightly in a familiar hoodie. Not just any hoodie, it was his. I recognized it immediately, the worn fabric, the faded logo on the chest. It was unmistakable, and the sight of it sent a chill down my spine. How could she be wearing something so personal, something that was his? My heart sank, and my mind raced with questions. I took a screenshot, my hands trembling, and sent it to him with a single message: "Explain this." It didn't take long for him to reply, but when he did, his words only deepened the pit in my stomach. "Oh, that was from 2 or 3 months ago," he said casually, as though the time frame made it any less hurtful. He told me they had gone out drinking with their friend group, and apparently, she had ended up wearing his hoodie. The excuses began rolling in, each one more convoluted than the last. First, he sent me a video from that night: laughing faces, clinking glasses, the kind of carefree energy that felt worlds away from the storm brewing inside me. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd overreact," he said, as if my anger were the problem, not his omission. I stared at his words, disbelief washing over me. Overreact? How was I supposed to react to something like this? Was I supposed to be okay with my so-called friend wearing his clothes I had never even worn myself? Was I supposed to shrug off the fact that he hadn't mentioned this night, this friendship, or the fact that she was creeping further and further into a space that should have been reserved for me? And then, the lies began to unravel. He tried to claim that we weren't even talking at the time, which was a blatant falsehood. I remembered those months vividly, the conversations, the late-night calls, the promises he made to be more honest, more transparent. We were talking, and I knew it. When I called him out on this, his story shifted once again. Now, he was saying it happened in the summer, a detail that seemed plausible until I remembered something crucial. She wasn't even in the country during the summer. The more I pressed him, the more his excuses crumbled. It was like watching someone trying to patch a sinking ship with duct tape, ineffective and desperate. Each explanation contradicted the last, leaving me with a jumbled mess of half-truths and outright lies. He couldn't even keep his story straight, and with every new inconsistency, my trust in him slipped further away. I showed him the evidence, the messages, the timelines, the undeniable proof that he was lying, and yet, he doubled down. "You always make me feel like I can't be honest," he said, turning the blame back on me. It was a familiar refrain, one he had used countless times before. To him, my anger was the problem, not his actions. It was as though he believed that if he could paint me as the irrational one, his deceit would somehow be justified. But this time, I couldn't let it go. The image of her in his hoodie was burned into my mind, a symbol of everything that felt wrong about their relationship and ours. It wasn't just the hoodie, it was what it represented: a boundary crossed, a trust violated, a bond between them that felt stronger than the one I had with him. I laid everything out in front of him, every lie, every inconsistency, every shred of evidence that contradicted his convoluted stories. I wanted him to see it all, to face the truth he had worked so hard to bury under layers of excuses. But instead of taking responsibility, instead of acknowledging the hurt he had caused, he turned it back on me. "This is why I don't tell you things," he said, his voice edged with frustration. "You always assume the worst. You make it impossible for me to be honest." His words cut deep, not because they were true but because they weren't. I wasn't the one who had lied, who had kept secrets, who had blurred the boundaries of our relationship with someone else. And yet, here he was, twisting the narrative until I was the villain in a story he had written. I could feel the familiar mix of anger and sadness rising in my chest, but this time, it wasn't just directed at him. It was also at myself for letting it get this far, for holding on to a relationship that felt more like a battleground than a partnership. Still, before I could process my emotions, he took things a step further. He called her. Moments later, my phone buzzed, and her name flashed on the screen. I didn't want to answer, but curiosity and frustration got the better of me. I picked up, and before I could even say a word, her voice came through the line, sharp and accusing. "Shame on you," she said, as though I were the one who had crossed a line. "Shame on you for thinking anything is going on between us. We've done nothing but try to help your relationship, and this is how you repay us." I sat there in stunned silence, her words echoing in my mind. Us. That was the part that stung the most. She spoke as if they were a united front, a team working together for some noble cause. But what kind of friend defends a man who has lied repeatedly to his girlfriend? What kind of friend steps into a space where she doesn't belong, all in the name of helping? Her voice droned on, each word another drop of gasoline on the fire of my suspicion. She insisted that every time they saw each other, it was for the sake of my relationship, as though their secret meetups and late-night calls were acts of selflessness rather than betrayal. She painted herself as a martyr, sacrificing her own time and energy to support us, when in reality, it felt like she was supporting him and only him. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that their relationship was purely platonic, that there was no hidden agenda, no feelings that crossed the boundaries of friendship. But how could I? The hoodie, the lies, the excuses, it all painted a picture that didn't align with their words. Even if there was nothing romantic between them, there was still something deeply wrong. The trust that should have existed between him and me had been shattered, replaced by doubt and resentment. And her role in all of this, whether intentional or not, had only made things worse. Am I right to think something's off? My gut tells me yes, but it's hard to separate my instincts from the tangled mess of emotions clouding my judgment. At most, I believe they have a platonic relationship, but even that doesn't erase the hurt or the sense of betrayal. Platonic or not, their actions have crossed a line, one that has left me questioning everything. As I hung up the phone, her words still ringing in my ears, I realized that I had a decision to make. I could keep clinging to this relationship, hoping against hope that things would somehow change, that the lies would stop, that the trust could be rebuilt. Or I could let go, finally free myself from the constant cycle of deceit and disappointment, and choose to prioritize my own happiness and peace of mind. For the first time in a long time, I felt clarity. This wasn't just about the hoodie or the lies or my friends overstepping. It was about the fact that I deserved better. I deserved a relationship built on honesty and respect, not one propped up by excuses and empty promises. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to walk away for good.